You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A Radiant Creator isn't making a living, they are living.
Robert Phoenix, welcome to Radiant Creators. Thanks for being on the show. A little bit about Robert here as we get started. Astrologer, writer, broadcaster, social commenter, Robert Phoenix has been engaged in the esoteric arts and healing since the mid-'80s. So, Robert's been around. He was doing this before it was cool. Robert's actually so old school that he's new school now. You know?
I know, the Ouroboros had to come right back around, right?
Yeah.
That kind of a thing, yeah.
And so one of the things that intrigued me, so we definitely listen to your shows. There's 15 Minutes of Flame, there's the Friday Farcast, there's Sunday Night Astro Live. Robert does a lot of content. He does it kind of free form, it's improvisational, it's great, always live. And of course he posts it after the live stream is over. But if you're interested in a unique view of the world, especially a unique view of the world through astrology, Robert is someone to follow. It's a constant enjoyment all through the week that he's putting out. So, Robert, how are you doing?
Well, no, thanks, Craig, and thanks for listening to the content. In spirit, I mean, I'm doing great. I feel incredibly alive, and I feel really kind of happy to some extent, fairly content, and that's internally. Externally, when I cruise around and look at the world we're living in, it's a really interesting picture to match up with those two realities, and I try not to let the external picture sort of predominate and change my internal picture, and that's my practice, and that takes a lot of work sometimes. So you put the two of those together, I'd say by and large, I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking.
Well, that sounds about right to me, because we're in a time right now where it seems like the world's being rebuilt. We've all been through the lockdown in one form or the other that we've been living through. We've all been kind of waterboarded to different extents the last couple of months, however that affected everyone individually. Here in America, definitely not as bad as what has happened in some countries as far as being locked down. And of course, here in America, not as bad in some states as other states. Happily here in Arizona, it hasn't been that bad. It's not like we're in Illinois, New Jersey, or California or something like that. It's something to be thankful for. So the world seems to be disintegrating. There's a lot of chaos. It's being rebuilt. And it seems like right now we're in the midst of, is the new normal going to be the globalist new normal, which sucks. It's not a very good vision at all. That's kind of Georgia Guidestones.
Right.
Or is it going to be each individual's new normal? So what you were saying is you're happy. And that's the way I feel quite often too, because we do create our own reality. It's important to be in charge of your own energy, create the reality that you want. You really can be at peace in the midst of hell. And so how do you think that's going? Are we in a time right now where it really comes down to the rise of the individual while everything disintegrates?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think so. So it's a really complex issue and a complex question, but I think we could distill it down into a certain model. But before our time today, I went to the local market. It's called HEB, and it's like a Kroger's, or in your neck of the woods, I think it's a Fry's, right? Big market. And I've made a practice of not wearing a mask wherever I go, in terms of my being in the world. And today, it's like I think the second or third time I've been to HEB ever since Greg Abbott, who's the governor of the state, said, well, if you can't social distance, you have to wear a face covering. The language is quite interesting, right? It says if you can't social distance, you have to wear a face covering. Well, as long as I'm social distancing from people inside that store, theoretically, I don't have to wear a face covering. And even if I had to wear a face covering, I could use a face covering of my own creation. It doesn't say you have to wear an N95. And there's nothing there. There's nothing in the language. So it's language used as kind of this, spell that sort of translates into some form of compliance, or to put you in a trance. That's what it's supposed to do. It's put you in a trance. So today I was in HEB. I was the only person in there without a mask. It was just, it's a very odd feeling, and not something that I'm all that uncomfortable with, because I've put myself out there in a lot of ways my entire life. So this wasn't like, I wasn't breaking new ground or anything, but it felt like a real Twilight Zone episode. I mean, it just really felt like a freaking Twilight Zone episode. Like if all of a sudden, I was in a coma, from say December of 2019, and all of a sudden I woke up out of the coma and walked into the HEB, I would try to figure out, what the F happened here. Like the break in reality is really severe. And, they've been kind of frogging us the whole time, right? They just keep turning up the temperature of the water the whole time, until finally now everybody's running around and they've all got masks on. And before it was like, well, maybe sort of, and, and then it was sort of this weird middle ground. And all of a sudden, the iron gloves come out. Getting back to your question, we're living in a very inverted reality at this point in time. Everything's inverted. So if you want to kind of look at the truth, you want to go into the inverted, portion of this thing, or the inverted reality, because that's what they've done. They've inverted everything. They've turned the pyramid upside down, essentially. And, this idea of the greater good, or sort of the common cause, which is what they're promoting now. Like, you have to wear a mask for the greater good. You have to wear a mask for the common cause. And this is sort of the behavioralist sort of pattern set that's being brought forward for us, right? Now, to answer your question, is that really what we need to do is go against that. That this idea of this sort of, dark new age, this dark utopianistic sort of, techno-feudal society, which is really what they have planned for us, where everything is about the, the greater good or the common cause. Like, we have to change that. We have to stop that. The greater good or the common cause is in each and every one of us. We don't need to be taken back into kindergarten. I mean, this is really the most spiritually insulting thing that can be given to us at this time. And we're at a point now, and I'll bring a little astrology in. Every time we reach these Saturn and Aquarius cycles, we're ready to do something very different. Aquarius represents this kind of new potentiality. It certainly is collective and global in its context. And Saturn is always about bringing new form, right? It solidifies this kind of new form. And the last 3 Saturn cycles, these are the ones that I've been a part of in my lifetime, that have Saturn and Aquarius. There's been major events that have taken place, and it literally hijacked whatever potentiality that's been there. So if we go back to the last Saturn cycle, where Saturn was in Aquarius, that started to happen in 1962. And of course, the big event in 1963 is the, supposed death, assassination of JFK. Boom. All right. Camelot is over, right? Camelot is done. Camelot, King Arthur, that whole myth, that whole archetype. Now we go from Camelot to the Great Society. Okay. So they're very, very different kinds of models. In Camelot, there's a beloved leader. In the Great Society, there really is no leader. It's like moving into this kind of version of what we have today. Johnson initiates the Great Society, and then we have sort of the beginning of the welfare state and the war on poverty and all the stuff, which really is this simulacra of what theoretically could have happened had Kennedy stayed alive. Right? There's this other reality that they're ready to insert and put into place. So during that time, we also got taken to Disneyland with psychedelics. And then we had this whole kind of Dionysic sort of experience with the 60s, which was in some ways quite interesting, but in other ways kind of took us off a particular path, because even that gets taken over at a certain point in time. And the CIA, who's running MK Ultra, Project Majestic, They decide to shut that down. And then we have this very dark end of the 1960s. 1969, we have Altamont. We have theoretically the Manson family. We got the Zodiac killer, and all the theoretical icons at that time. Dyer passed away, Mama Cass, Jimi Hendrix, Brian Jones, Jim Morrison, and it's just like boom, it's over, right? Drug of choice goes from LSD to methamphetamine and heroin. There you go. The next time this happens is in 1991, and this is when we move into the Gulf War territory, right? So this is Gulf War I. Bush is the president, and this is when he essentially tells everybody that, guess what? We're going to have a new world order, right? This is the famous New World Order speech, and that we are theoretically joined together as one planet in what's called the Coalition of the Willing. And we're supposed to go after this bad guy, Saddam Hussein. So what we do have is we have this really kind of global kind of awakening, this kind of global moment, but it's hijacked. It's totally hijacked. And we have, every country under the sun participating in removing this. Well, they didn't even really move him. They just went in and, did a lot of damage and kept the villain alive so his son could finish him off. But really what they were doing was they were essentially saying, okay, we're gonna hijack this moment, we're gonna hijack this time, and we're gonna kind of reroute people. We're gonna give them kind of a different reality than what was potentially there for us. And then if you look at the 90s become very, very dark. It's an extremely dark period. It's the rise of crack cocaine, crack houses, gangster rap, and then we have the Clintons moving into the White House in the 90s, which is at the beginning of a extremely dark era. So now we go through all of that, and now we come to where we are now. Hello, Saturn in Aquarius once more, and we have this potential theoretically to connect in at a more collective perspective or more collective level. And what do? They create another global event, right? And they hijack this moment in time, this astrological moment in time. And so now we're all put under the Corona spell, or the spell of the king, right? Which is interesting because when we go back and we look at Kennedy and the death of Kennedy, that's like that's a kill the king ritual. It's a totally plotted out, planned out kill the king ritual. And here we are now dealing with this resurrection of the king, but it's the corona, it's the crown, and it's really the dark crown in a lot of ways. It is the dark king. So I think it's a really interesting time, and I think a lot really rides on where we are right now, how we each individually respond to the times that we're in has merit. It means something. It really means something. If you're not jerked around like a yo-yo, you're actually performing a very vital function. So that's, I think, first and foremost. And I still believe that there is chaos, really, really good potential, positive potential for good. I don't want to use the word good chaos. I don't want to get into a value system, right? But chaos that can be constructive and can work for us versus against us.
Yeah, because the chaos, we find ourselves in the midst of a lot of chaos right now, but that's also opportunities for, I would say, the individual who realizes, okay, everything's crazy, reality's broken up a little bit, we're in a time of transition. That also equals all this energy that we have that we can draw from. We've got all these puzzle pieces thrown everywhere. We can remake our individual lives in the way that we want. So yeah, it's definitely crazy, but it's a time of the, I tend to just see it as a time of the powerful individual, because it seems that, well, more on that in a bit. I wanted to clarify. So we're talking about Saturn and Aquarius was 1962, then 1990, 91?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're entering Saturn and Aquarius again. And so when did that recently just happen, or what year will that happen?
Yeah. So yes, that did happen recently. Saturn was in Capricorn. So we had two big Saturn events, right? We had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and that happened on January 13th of this past year. And that was a really, this is what astrologers were talking about, was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And I just kept looking at this thing, and I'm like, man, it's not just Saturn and Pluto. We got the South Node there. We got Jupiter there. Mars is along for the ride. There's the Sun. We're in for something major right around this time. So a lot of my forecasts were focusing on that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. If you go back to December 25th, December 26th of 2019, this is when we had a major eclipse going across the Southeast Asia, and it actually goes across the Wuhan area. And that was another big moment. I'm like, what's going on here? I mean, we've got this eclipse. It's headed over southern China. It's actually taking place on the midheaven of Hong Kong's chart. There's a there, right? And so you look at that eclipse, and then you look at what happened on January 13th, and they're connected, right? Because by the time we get into the first of the year, like the first week in January, we're starting to hear the first kinds of real rumors around this thing called the coronavirus, which I started to track immediately. So January 13th is kind of a really big time, because if I'm not mistaken, it's not long after that we have the first coronavirus case in Washington State, right? So this is a really big time. And I gave a talk at the Austin Astrological Society, and that was right after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. It was I think it was about 4 or 5 days after that. And one of the things that I did is I wrote the word time on the board, and then I circled the word time, and I basically said that we are running out of time, like time is ending. And if you follow astrology, and I practice Western Placidus / mundane astrology, you could see that with the South Node there, and with this conglomeration of Capricornian planets, and Capricorn's a timekeeper, you could just see that time was running out, like time was up. And this is what I was sharing with people. And I said, you're going to be in a place where at some point you're not going to be able to move around a lot. And whoever you are at that given point in time, you're going to need to be able to kind of, manage that, right? Whether it was your resources or your spirituality, and my advice was for people to kind of get right with God. I mean, that's what I was telling people at that time. Like, you've got to get right with things, because there's going to be a time at some point where this is all going to change. And, on 3/11, this is when the NBA said, okay, we're not going to have a season anymore. And that was it. That was the domino effect. When the NBA canceled its season, everything started to shut down. And really, that was the end of time. Like, we went from the 20th century, the latter end of the 20th century, early 21st century, third industrial revolution, to this thing that we're in now. Okay, so everything that existed before 3/11 is over. It's all done. We're living in a post-historical moment. And people need to think about that. And it's weird, right? Because you look around and go, I know this tree, I know this tree, I know this lamppost, I know this car. Everything sort of looks the same, but it's really not the same. We're living in a very different reality now. And people would be, I think it would be really good for them to, understand that.
No, it is good to understand that, of course. And so this recent Saturn in Aquarius, when did that happen? Do you know roughly?
Yeah, I'll give you the exact date. Give me a second.
Or even the month, yeah.
Yeah, so it happened in February.
February, okay.
Yeah, so let me just go in, because I I'm trying to work on this Virgo thing in this lifetime. So let me do this.
Myself.
What's your sign?
Well, this month, on February 3rd, 1970. So Aquarius, Sun, Cancer rising, Capricorn moon, and my North node is in Pisces. So my South node's Virgo. So I know I know how to be an uptight Virgo.
So my south node is in Pisces, so we
Oh, we
we
cross.
complete, yeah, we complete each other's circuit. Okay, let me get into the 21st century here. I'll give you the exact date. Here we go. In 2020, just even the sort of the numerological import and content of 2020 is like really powerful. It's like the Aeon times two, and that's when I knew that things were going to end. You just look at the Aeon, right, with the Judgment card. It's the end of one world and the beginning of another. And the people that write the scripts, they know all this shit. They know what's going on.
Oh yeah. I mean, you mentioned
They're,
the Aeon card in the tarot. Are you talking about number 4, like the
no, I'm talking about like the Aeon in the Crowley deck is the 21st card, or the
21st card?
20th card, or 20th card, and in Rider Waite, the 20th card is Judgment. So it's Judgment. I was a Thoth reader for a long time, so I always refer to it as the Aeon.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Judgment.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So we have Saturn in Aquarius, March 23rd. Right. That's March 23rd, which is okay. This makes total sense because they're also piggybacking off of the spring equinox energy to start something new. Right, I remember that now. That was like very clear. And then the moon was balsamic in Pisces at that time. So this is where we went into Saturn in Aquarius, and that would have been 3/23/2020. And Saturn's gone retrograde, and right now, as the crow flies, as they say, I believe it's at 29. Where are we? 29 Capricorn. Yep. So today's the 15th. It's at 29. It's at the anaretic degree, and it moves pretty quickly here. It picks up some steam, and it goes to 20. Goes all the way back to, looks like 25, right? So it's going to go back 5 degrees, which is really, really interesting. And that takes us back to the degree of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on January 13th. So this 25th degree of Capricorn is going to be super interesting, right? It takes us back to that time. So that's going to be right around the 2nd of September. And, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Like, and I haven't really spent a lot of time with it. I'm just like kind of pondering it now. But it could take us back to that time and maybe even slightly the time before that time, which would be somewhat interesting, especially if you're tired of what's happening now. But it could also be kind of a replay of yet kind of another reset within the reset. So everything is very fluid right now. It's all super fluid. The nodes are in Gemini, Sagittarius. They're mutable. Nothing's really written in stone right now, which I think is it's a good thing, right? It's really a good thing. No matter what the Twitterverse or, what these pundits are trying to hammer into our heads, nothing is written in stone currently.
I like that, and I think I feel that way, that nothing's written in stone. Like right now, it seems like it's not the best time for certainty, because I don't think certainty serves this moment. Everyone has their ideas, their opinions, their speculation, and that's totally fine. But it does seem like, well, for me, I've always been a very intuitive person, and I can't feel the future. Usually you feel it, you have some idea, but right now it's just, there's a veil. So I think it's almost as if the future's being kind of hidden from us for a reason.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I have had the same kind of sense, right? That there was this thing that was out there, I could feel into that thing, and I would agree with you. I would say that those sort of modes of perception are very different now.
Something you say on your show, well, actually, before I mention that, so the 20th card, Judgment, that is, powerful card. But also, if we think about master numbers in numerology, 2020, some might interpret that as a 22
Absolutely.
and not a 4.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And 22, which is interesting, takes us back to the first card in the major arcana, which is the Fool, and the Fool is the 0 point, right? There's no theoretical number associated with the Fool, but zero, it's often considered like the 22nd card in the major arcana. So the Fool it's a beautiful card to be a companion with these two 20s, right? Because we have the end of one time and the beginning of another time, and then we have this potentiality that's connected to the Fool card. And you're right, again, 22 is a master number, and it's connected to sort of enlightened structures. Let's hope they're enlightened structures, because there are two 11s inside of 22, and 11 is the number of inspiration and revelation. So, and then we get off into all kinds of symbolism: twin towers, 9/11, cult operations. Like, we're in a really interesting time, man. It's like it's all happening.
Well, before all this started, I mean, when you look around, you see the, I'll call it like the mundane reality, and it almost feels like this is something that many people have wished for. Because when you needed some kind of a radical change, because to me humanity was getting kind of boring. I wasn't seeing a lot of evolution really happening. It was sort of like, you know, all was static, and it just seemed like humanity maybe was going to just die a slow death of stagnation. So this massive change that we're going through, this new age, Judgment, the Fool, the Master Builder, this is good stuff. Even if it's annoying and scary to some, it's also kind of a spiritual party time. Finally, we're seeing some evolution happen for maybe the masses, but I think definitely the individuals who have an awareness of deeper things. This is party time, so it's important that we remember that, because it's I stay positive quite a lot, but sometimes I get down. But then I remember, hey, it's party time. I asked for this. I wanted to incarnate and see this. So, only way through it is to do it. So do it powerfully.
Well, you're absolutely right, Craig. And yeah, and that kind of conscious awareness and awareness of the moment, I think, is essential. It's really essential. And if we want to play with, this kind of progression with the Arcana, the next card after the Fool is the Magician. And the Magician, it represents the individual, sacred technologies, taking advantage of timing. The individual is also very much connected to things like misdirection, sleight of hand, conjuring, illusion. It's a really, really interesting card. And I feel like, when we get into Gemini, we're kind of entering into the realm of the Magician, right? The true node of Gemini is, because when you get into Gemini, you get into things like prestidigitation, sleight of hand, look over here, look over here, look over here. And, the perfect movie for me that really represents that idea of the Magician as Gemini is that movie, The Prestige. And with Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman and David Bowie. And if you know about the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because Gemini plays a significant role in that movie. Like, there's encoding through Gemini there. And so if we move one step off of the Fool and move towards the Gemini, or towards the Magician rather, it gives us some level of permission to be able to move in our world in a very kind of, creative way, and to use a number of different tools at our disposal in order to create a reality that could even be considered a separate reality from the one that we're living in now. And I feel like ultimately this is probably what's going to happen. We're probably going to have two separate realities that are sort of living side by side at some point. And I think we're getting closer to that as it is.
A channeled entity, so I know some people might cringe when they hear that. Some believe in such things and some don't. But a guy who's been around for quite a while, Bashar, you know, that
Yep.
guy, or that them, Bashar, the channeled entity.
Right.
He's talked about that for quite a while. That basically humanity is in a time right now where you've got these two evolutionary paths that are becoming more and more and more defined, more and more powerful, and basically we're going to end up just splitting, but you won't really know that it happened. Your world will just be better, and then for some people are kind of heading towards a more enlightened realm or a nice realm, and some are heading towards more of a hell realm. But it's all going to happen here multidimensionally on this planet, and basically we just won't see each other anymore. The realms just won't be aware of one another, like, because the evolutionary momentum is so great at this time. So that's something that Bashar has gone on about many times.
Well, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense because, you know, I try to be, you know, I'm a commentator, I'm an observer, and I also try to be a bit of a witness. And, you know, I'll chime in and I'll have a position on something, but I also try to like look at something and say, well, what's really going on here? Like, so when we look at the whole police thing, like there's like a shadow side and a dark side to this whole police situation, because there are bad cops. We know they're bad cops. Like, I think everybody has at least one bad cop story. Okay. At least one, some people more. And there are theoretical good cops as well. I'm not here to get into that kind of a debate, but what we're seeing here with this thing around cops and policing at just a symbolic level is kind of interesting. Whether or not you want to defund the police and let the anarchists run your town, that's a related topic. But if you look at this disassembling of some level of external authority, it's kind of interesting, right? It's kind of interesting because then what happens is that people have to assume their own authority. Now, the problem here is when people assume or assert their own authority, but the people that are essentially engineering the disassembling, you know, are frowning upon it and say, well, you can't do that. Right? You can't assert your own authority. You have to be a part of this program. And that's where things get interesting, right? That's where the pushback comes into play, because ultimately we're supposed to be, you know, our own authorities. At the end of the day, that's it, right? So I think it's interesting in that we're seeing the symbolic kind of operation where authority is being disassembled. And even when we look at our politicians, like, what good have they been really over the last few months except for rubber stamping trillions of dollars, you know, and trying to fast track vaccines, right? They're worthless at this point. So they're authorities as well. And so we're seeing a disassembling of even their authority on some level. Now, what they'll be more than happy to do is replace that authority with another model, which I've talked about, which is the authority of the foundation or the authority of the NGO or the authority of a corporation who's kind of repurposed themselves as being, you know, somebody who cares about Black Lives Matter or whatever, right? So they're willing to shift that model and they're willing to shift that paradigm as long as they can stay in control. But what they don't want to do or they don't want to happen is for this idea that we as individuals can be self-governed, sovereign, self-rule. We have a divine intelligence that sets things up. We know how to operate with one another, and we've never really got a shot. We've never really had a shot at this. We've never really had a shot at this. And now we're at a time where we have theoretically a lot of great technology at our disposal that, you know, you give me 200 really switched on people and a couple of massive 3D printers and some good off-grid solar electricity. And I tell you, those 200 people could whip something up really nice in about a year, right? Real nice, real self-sustaining, right? Really switched on. But they don't want that. They want to continue to control the paradigm. And this is where we're at right now. And this gets back to your idea around, or what you brought up around the individual and why the individual is so important, because we're the seed pod for that experience.
Yeah, I think individuals are the future. And then, of course, individuals certainly can work together towards a collective community. But I think that's the big difference. If we are going to split, it's going to be well, actually something I was looking at earlier as far as a place of splitting is something I'm seeing, golems and egregores. So, in Jewish folklore, you've got the golem, and one can look at the Jewish folklore, they can read about it. Thomas Sheridan did a great video on it recently. But the golem, was created from Earth to serve the rabbi for good purposes was the idea. But the golem was kind of this mindless thug thing, and it only had one real emotion of its own, and that was anger. So as long as it was given orders and it knew what to do, it would go and do them. But it didn't have a soul, it didn't have a brain. But if it was left without anything to do, it would become angry and start ransacking the town. And so eventually it was found to be too much of a nuisance, and they got rid of it. But supposedly there are spells and such where you can actually create golems, also known as topos in other cultures. But many believe that these can actually be created. And if we look at Lord of the Rings, they do talk about it in the books, but also in the movie, you do see Saruman, the white wizard, well, the evil white wizard, Saruman, he was creating orcs out of the earth. He was creating golems, he was creating topos to go and do dark work. And so, something I'm seeing as far as a possible split in society, like if we have a multidimensional shift where you have your kind of, as Case Parks puts it, love train and the fear train. If you have these two evolutions that then become free to truly follow the path that they want to follow, it does seem like we're living in a world, and I say this lovingly, but really full of a lot of golems, people who seem to have been created by the forces that you're speaking of that want to keep control. And you start wondering who created some people in society. Is it God that created them, which is how it should be? Or is it that you almost might say like dark magicians created them? So I'm looking around, and I mean, maybe I'm speaking metaphorically, but I'm not sure. Does everyone really have a soul? Because it seems to me like some people are literally orcs or golems or tulpas. They were created by the people that we're talking about that want to maintain global control, and I'm not sure if they're really humans.
Wow, so you're going down a mine shaft now. I mean, this isn't even a rabbit hole. This is a mine shaft.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have some thought. I definitely have some thoughts around that. So
yeah, what are they?
I don't believe everybody has a soul, and that may sound like blasphemy, and I always assumed that everybody had a soul. And then I stumbled upon this website called montauk.net, and it's this guy named Tom, and he was connected to the whole Cassiopean thing. Was it Laura Yadachek or whatever her name is? So I went to his website, and it was an interesting website. And this is when I came across this idea that not everybody has souls. And I think I ran across something else at that time as well that corroborated kind of what was being said about this. And when I thought about it, it was like, yeah, it makes total sense. It's like you have people who seem to be these empty vessels, and that they become occupied by trends or fads or newspeak or whatever. And then you have people who are quote unquote ensouled, right? They are ensouled, and they actually have a soul. And then there are a very small group of people who are they're not ensouled, and they're also not without a soul. And these are the people that are like the guys in that movie, The Dark City, that are inside that planet, right? And they're essentially kind of moving things around and sort of manipulating the unsouled people, or the people that are, sort of these receptors. And of course, it's a concept that the Matrix uses as well, right? That the agents will occupy people inside the Matrix. And how many times have you seen people just kind of react as if they were like quoting a script or something, and they were like caricatures in some ways? And I think we're all capable of that, by the way, when we kind of get off of our center and we get into reactive mode. But some people they do that. And what I've seen is that, or this is what I feel, is that a lot of these people who do not have these souls are quite upset. I think they're quite angry. And, this gets into the whole concept of the NPC and the background players and the background characters. And the background characters don't want to be background characters. They want to be part of the game, right? And I think a lot of the people that we see at protests or whatever they are, to me they're very much like an aggregation of NPCs. And what they're trying to do through this aggregation of this kind of group assemblage or this group mind is to put themselves kind of into the game, right? And you can say, okay, well, they're the byproducts of social Marxist theory and intersectional politics and vaccines and cell phones or whatever, and those things could be true, right? But what I see them as is kind of this kind of sort of assemblage of entities that are trying to enter into something, but they don't know how to do it. So, they're running around. I mean, I saw this, I played this video yesterday on my show, and it was in Portland, and you could tell that there was this guy in a car who was baiting these people. He was totally baiting them. And he was waiting for one of them to open the door. And as soon as they did, he sprang into action. He was wearing a flak jacket, so-called black African-American male, and he took one of these people down hard, really hard. He was waiting for it. And then once that happened, they all flipped out. They just totally flipped out. And then he got back in the car, and it was like a scene from Rick and Morty. It was just weird. They were all acting like, he's got arrows in the back of the car. Whose cell phone is that? We need somebody down here. We need more people. It was like a scene out of Rick and Morty. It was weird. It was like they're trying to insert themselves into the script or into the gameplay, but they don't know how to do it. They don't. So they assemble together and try to have this kind of group effort, this group front. It's really bizarre, and you can even go to the other side where it gets very extreme and very dark, right? And we have all these stories where we're getting this very intense kind of narrative of black on white crime, like really hardcore stuff. This gal in Indianapolis, right? Her and her boyfriend have words with, this group, and they say Black Lives Matter. They say all lives matter. Apparently the guy's packing, they're packing. Okay. Game theory, they cancel each other out and they move on. Well, this other group decides that they're going to go get them and come from behind and then cap them, right? So this girl gets capped. And then they come onto Facebook, and now they're taunting this girl's family. And it's like, to me, it's the same story as the people on the streets in Portland. It's just a much darker, more aggressive version. Like, they want to come into the script. They don't know how to come into the script. And both sides have considerable programming on some level, right? And this is kind of where we are. And it's really tragic. And it's really tragic for both sides, and it's quite dangerous, to be honest with you. It's very dangerous. We're now being inserted into a most dangerous game, and people are actually being hunted around. And so you got to be really careful with your consciousness now. I mean, that is really the lesson here. So first of all, if you're walking in an area where there are groups of people that are gathered together, and those people might just have a very different opinion of what their reality is and what your reality is, you may want to think twice about being in that area. I'm just saying, okay? And I'm not talking about being segregated or passing any kind of judgment. It could be anything. Like when I was in my 20s, I went on a little weird little backpacking tour in Kauai. Like, dude, I was in the wrong place. I was in the back country of the Waimea Canyon, and I shouldn't have been there. And I was lucky that I got out of there alive. So we got to be aware of our surroundings, wherever you are, whatever your surroundings are. You got to be aware of it. Do you want to be in that place? Probably not. You probably want to avoid some level of confrontation if you have to. If you have, and then if you're in a place like that and somebody says Black Lives Matter, what's the best that you? Yes, they do. Right? Just keep on moving. And you may have a different opinion. And you may say, shit, I'm a universalist and all lives matter. But in that moment, is it really worth it? So like, and I'm not blaming that person. I'm not blaming that person for saying that. I'm not going to blame a victim who got shot. But this is where we have to be really aware of our consciousness. And so we have to look at like what sticks to us. What sticks to us. And we got to be as streamlined and have as less drag on this so-called system as possible. And again, where does it take us, Craig? Right back to the individual.
It does. The individual. It's the rise of the individual. The individuals are on the train that you want to be on. And, well, what you're saying, it speaks to me definitely because, people that I know who are not violent people have recently been attacked. Luckily, only verbally, but it was something that they did not expect. Didn't have their mask on quite right, and somebody flips out on them. And it's like that agent coming through the person. And one thing about the golem, and I'll link to it in the show notes. There is a book. It's online. You can read more about the golem story. But it's this whole beautiful story about how the golem acted, how its mind worked, how it was created, what it was used for. But that was one of the drawbacks of the golem, even if it's created by good forces. Now, if it's created by dark forces, it's even worse. But even by good forces, it only has, basically, a soulless creature only has one emotion of its own, and that's anger. Like you were saying, how they're angry.
Angry.
Yeah.
Both sides are angry, right? I mean, and could they actually be creating, synthetic beings that actually perform the role of a golem? Sure, why not?
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that, right? We live in a very weird universe, and the technology that the front end of the technology we're shown is nothing like the technology on the back end. I guarantee you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Isn't Frankenstein kind of a retelling of the golem story?
Well, the golem, of course, was created from mud, and it was created for a purpose. Same thing as a tulpa, really. Although a tulpa, I think, was just manifested purely out of thought form. I think was the case. I'm not totally sure on that one, but yeah, Frankenstein really could just be said to be an evil golem. I guess it could have been a good golem, but basically it was created from, you can say earth. It was created from body parts. It was given life. It was given energy. I mean, the way that they would make a golem, a mud golem, basically, out of earth, is they would form a little statue leg on the ground that looked like a human, and then when they wrote like the name of God on it, they would actually put like a spell, and they put it in its mouth, and they would write certain things on the forehead. It's all documented. Then it would come to life, and you would not know it from a human.
Interesting. Wow, interesting, like a replica.
Yeah, so you wouldn't know. I mean, who created it knows what it is, but everyone else does not know. And so when the rabbis created the golems, they would be in the society, basically taking care of the people, doing tasks, but the people did not know that they were golems. Only the rabbis did. So, well, definitely with keeping your energy good. So I think it's very important to, at least for me personally, whatever person's practices, it doesn't really matter as long as they have one, is meditate. Like for me, meditate in the morning. And what is your mission? Well, one thing, what is your intent? What do you want to create in your life? Meditate, get clear on that, feel that, but also throughout your day, what you're going to go do, be aware of your mission at this time, because it's very easy to get taken off course. Like for me, I am at this point in time the very happy gray man. I'm really happy not to be seen. I don't stand out. I just go when I have to go in the store. I put my mask on. I wear one around my neck, the little pull-up scarf things. I go in, get my stuff. And then as soon as I leave the store, I pull it off and I'm back in my car and I'm gone. Because to me, a day which is 100% win is one where no one could have actually pointed me out who was in that store. Nobody saw me, not even the cashier. So I'm very gray man right now because I'm on a mission. I want to go to Trader Joe's and get some dates and some... and get some orange juice and this and that. That's about me. I'm an individual. I'm not going to take on this larger thing because there are golems ready to go off on you if your mask isn't perfect.
Right.
Like, what's with that guy along with mind control and golems, you saw did you see the guy on the Alaskan flight who started saying, Jesus was black, accept that, I'm going to kill everybody. And I'm thinking, now there is a golem who's like, his programming is off. No one told him what to do, or did someone tell him what to do? But I was listening to that and I was just thinking, there is no way anybody in their even half-assed right mind would ever do that. I mean, that guy, and with politics now, well, law and politics getting mixed up, and people who were violently rioting being let off, not prosecuted for it. I mean, it would not surprise me if this guy who did that nonsense on the plane gets off.
No, well, absolutely, no, he will get off. I mean, and theoretically, I mean, this is why planes have air marshals and everything got so strict post 9/11. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that guy falls under the realm of a terror threat. I mean, he was a terror threat. He was threatening to kill people on a plane. Okay, if you haven't seen it, this dude, so-called black male African American guy, very big, just started to lose his stuff on a plane, and went into this kind of, if you don't accept Jesus as black, I'm going to kill you. That was his rant. And it was almost like, he got triggered, or his programming got switched on, because he was so irrational. It was like borderline mentally ill, this thing. It was really bizarre. And it took about three people to he was a big dude too. And it wasn't like somebody who was like so totally calculated and giving some kind of a dissertation, right? There was no kind of intersectionalist dissertation. He did have that golem-like quality that you're referring to. The other thing I was thinking about was, really, since, and I think we've always been kind of engaged in a series of planetary rituals. Like when you go back and you look at the Kennedy killing, it's a kill the king ritual. Same with the takedown of Nixon, another kill the king ritual. We've always had these rituals kind of as background programs, but it really seems like that post 9/11, the revelation of the method, right, really took hold, and they began to show us these rituals front and center all the time. So whether they were the Grammys or the Emmys or the MTV Music Awards or the Olympics or the Super Bowl halftime shows, we're dealing with roughly about 20 years worth of explicated ritualization, right? And I think that those things matter. I think they matter. I think they're doing everything for a very specific reason. It's all very encoded. And from what I understand, there are also companion rituals that are taking place that we're not seeing. Okay. So there's the as above, so below kind of event that's going on. So to your point, and bringing it back to the golem again, are these rituals forces of animation, right? Are these the same kinds of things that Sauron was doing when he was summoning these orcs out of the earth? And is this the end game of a lot of this ritualization? What about something like the Walking Dead, right? The Walking Dead has been on for 10 years. I've never watched The Walking Dead, but a lot of people have. And what kind of ritualization has taken place, encoding has taken place inside The Walking Dead? It's all very bizarre, right? So to your point, I think there's like a back end to a lot of what's happened or what's happening.
Yes, and what has been society's infatuation with zombies in the first place? Like The Walking Dead, it's really, I've only watched a few episodes, but it's really not a great show. Not much really happens in it, but there's zombies and they're shooting them. And that's pretty much, you could summarize every episode of The Walking Dead. There were zombies and they shot them. But that seems to be an intense infatuation we've had, which I definitely think has some deep meanings. Because there was a guy, I forget his name. He was a college professor, and he wrote a book called Symbology, and it gets into the psychology of zombies. And it seems like there's quite a match between actually the golem, the NPC, really, NPC golem, and the zombie. Same thing, really. And there's also another thing I was just getting into recently was looking into the egregore. Now, it's or egregores.
Egregore,
yeah. And there's a book I just saw, so I saw, oh wow, there's an audible version of it, so I clicked on it. Yes, buy that right now. Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny, it's called, by Mark Stavish. And like the definition of egregore is an occult concept representing a thought form or collective group mind, an autonomous psychic entity made up of and influencing the thoughts of a group of people. And that really was making me wonder too. I mean, that is sort of a zombies are kind of a group mind, or golems could be said to form a group mind. Anyway, it's strange how a lot of what we're experiencing today was, it's all folklore, it's all myth, it's all historic sort of truth. I mean, now I look at the detailed writings of how you create a golem in Jewish folklore, and I go, my God, this is like literally care and feeding of an NPC that you send off to go riot.
Right.
I mean, literally, it was written like, here's the spells to do it. And it exists. I found it explicitly in Jewish folklore, but certainly not picking on them. I found it other places. I just found it best documented there, and that's where I found it first. But there's the tulpas. It seems to be something that exists in many cultures, the actual creation of a golem.
It's really interesting, because when I view a lot of the footage from so-called front lines of these people that are supposedly, overthrowing the system, whatever, I often wonder, how deep is their commitment, right? Like, do they really understand that they could die? Like, are they willing to die for what they're doing? Because at some level, that could easily happen. They could wind up, I mean, now it's probably less so than, say, maybe like the 1960s or the 70s, where you could easily become a fatality. But you could easily die in a situation like that, especially with a lot of randomness and chaos. And I was watching some footage of, again, it's that federal courthouse, the federal building in Portland, which is under siege, right? And by the way, there's a whole other thing going on with like Antifa in Portland, which is relentless, right? It's a totally relentless thing. It's every single night. And part of it has to do with Portland burning through their resources, right? The municipal city of Portland having to respond to stuff all the time. So what they're doing is they're taking a page out of the Cloward Piven strategy, which comes out of the 1960s, and they're essentially radicalizing it, right? They're making Portland spend all this money to defend itself, so that ultimately they want to bankrupt Portland. That's exactly what they want to do. They want to have Portland have absolutely no ability to exist as a financial entity. But anyway, besides that, I was watching this confrontation between this group and then the federal building, and this one guy is standing out in front of the federal building, and he's got a boom box, and he's not wearing a helmet, he's not wearing a flak jacket. Somebody pulled his string, and it was just F you, F you, F you. And then what the feds did is they threw out a flashbang, which is supposed to get your attention. And then the flashbangs also have some level of either tear gas or something that's going to be an irritant, right? And so the big thing is to throw the flashbangs back to the places that they came from. Well, as soon as he did that, one of the guys from the Fed side hit him with a rubber bullet right above his eye, okay? And it was graphic. I mean, this thing was so I take it back. It was by his nose. That's right. So it was so graphic, and he was like basically spitting out blood. And it's like, did he understand at that moment, right? Like this is what the consequences are. Like you could have a flying projectile hit you in a way that will change, alter your life forever, right? Change how you breathe, disfigure you, and maybe in some circumstances even kill you. And I guarantee you that the majority of those people don't have that level of awareness, Craig. They don't. And I think to your point, this definitely fits under Golem category, right? Golem
It does,
category.
yeah.
It's just anger. He's just there. He's shaking this thing. It's all he's doing. He's just shaking this boom box, rinse, repeat, F you, F you, F you, and then bang. There's the rubber bullet to the nose.
Yeah, and I think I watched that, and I think in exploring that a little bit, I found that it looked like it could have been a boombox. Also looked like a small propane tank. I guess the idea is that I guess they call them federal police, or I'm not sure who was there, but they couldn't tell what it was. But it looked like he was going to throw it. So they're like, well, he's going to throw something at us. We don't know what it is. We tried to get him away by kicking, by shooting a flashbang at him, but he's not. So they were really in a hard spot. You're standing there in the open, and someone maybe is going to throw a bomb, as far as you know, at you. So he shot at him. And my guess is he was shooting center mass, most likely. I mean, rubber bullets are not very accurate because they get hot, and they at the range he was shooting, he was just kind of shooting blind, basically.
From the path, and it hit him in the face.
Yeah, so he was probably shooting center mass, and it got him in the face. And as far as we know, he may have shot more than once. I couldn't really hear it. So,
right.
But yeah, when that guy got shot in the face with a rubber bullet, it definitely was real for him in that moment. And you're absolutely right. Do they really have the resolve? And I would say no, because I wanted to look at some point I'm going to do this. I wanted to look at the astrology of 1919 and then 2020, 1919, 1920, then 2019, 2020, because it really feels like, even though this happened slightly after, after World War I, when the Germans returned home, they realized that there really was Russian collusion. Stalin and Lenin had been working on Germany. They wanted their Germanic Bavarian state. I think they called it the Socialist Bavarian state they wanted to create in Germany.
Right.
And so while everybody's off fighting, they were sending all these provocateurs to get people riled up. They were trying to push the socialism. And so when the German troops came home, they were like, what the hell has been going on? We're not going to put up with this. They formed the Free Corps, the Freaking Corps, and they pretty much lined up all the commies and they killed them. It was very, very brutal,
Yeah.
And so that wasn't really the government as much as that was the people. The soldiers that returned home were like, no, we just got back from getting our asses kicked. We're not coming home to a socialist country, we were just fighting Russia. We're not going to give them our country because they've been degenerating people while we've been gone. So I do wonder sometimes when I see what's going on, what we have in common with the early 1919, 1920, because that's when that sort of began. When the Free Corps began to form, and they were just the people, you could say the militia, and they were like, it's so brutal. If one studies that time, there was literally blood running down the gutters of Berlin.
Yeah, if we could rewind the clock and go back to 1915, which is when the Bolshevik Revolution really starts to pick up pace, right? And Uranus was in the sign of Aquarius during that time, so it's a revolutionary time. We know that, right? We know it was a revolutionary time. What's interesting is that a lot of the Zoomers, the kids that are born between 1996 and roughly 2002, so that 6-year period, a lot of those kids were born with Uranus in 2000. I think 2003 is the outlier, Uranus in Aquarius. So we have a whole generation of kids who have the same Uranian planetary configuration that was around during that revolutionary period, which is quite interesting on a certain level. The other thing is that if you go back to 1919, which is the year that you're talking about in 1918. We have a Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which is in the sign of Leo during that time. Well, I think it's around 1919, and then we move forward, and then we get the Saturn Neptune conjunction, both in the sign of Leo, and at that point, communism is on the rise. Like if you go back and look at the year 1920, it is the beginning of what we call the 100-year march. And I broke that down on my channel about 2 weeks ago. And you just look at the events of 1920, everything's being set up, right? So this is sort of the conclusion of that 100-year cycle that begins in 1920, or what's known as the 100-year march. Now, what's interesting is that if you're into astrology, you're going to understand this, right? The key factor in this period of time, 1919, 1920, the mid 1960s, and where we are now is Chiron. And Chiron was in Aries, or is in Aries, in all three cycles, right? So we see Chiron in Aries as kind of this interesting sort of revolutionary force. It comes into Chiron. Chiron is discovered in 1977, by the way. So everything here is backdated. Like this ephemeris I'm looking at is backdated. So we could look back. They didn't know that Chiron was there then, but looking back in that time now, it's like, oh, check that out. Chiron was in Aries then. Oh yeah, we know what that's like because we lived through 1968 when Chiron moves into Aries. And 1968 is one of the most volatile years in the 20th century, right? And so here we go again. Like right now, we've got Chiron and Aries again. So this is a theme that's being connected. And you go back and you look at the 20s, it's also like the beginning of the unions, right? Here in this country. And you've got, the unions trying to shake down the automobile manufacturers in Detroit. And, the unions at their roots are socialists. And my father was a Teamster, and I don't have any problem saying that. All right. The Teamsters Union was actually really good for my father. He had a job, whatever. But that's where those roots are. They're socialist roots. So we see the rise of the unions at that time. And the unions actually perform a function and they serve a role, but they're also, at that time, they're also kind of shaking some of these businesses down. Right. So there's another thing. What do we see now? We're seeing the disassembling of like small businesses, right? Small businesses are being disassembled. Alicia Garza has come right out and said she is not in favor of the gig economy, right? She's not in favor of entrepreneurialism. It doesn't support unions. And here we go, Chiron and Aries. It's all over, there it is. History is repeating itself again.
Well, something that you said in some of your videos, I definitely need to look into the 100-year march. That's really interesting. So, and, I'm definitely, a follower of astrology also. And so I hope people, as they're listening, I'm sure many people are, aware of astrology, follow astrology, but especially when you get into the longer cycles like that and you look at what happened in society and in the world, it rings very true, and it helps you understand what's happening now. So all of this really helps to understand, well, what's happening now? Well, what happened in the past? Now it's happening again. It's a cycle, and it helps you navigate, especially a time like this, which is so crazy, and the intuitive among us, who can usually feel the future. They can see around the corner, or like, I don't know what's around the corner. I don't know. I lost that ability a few weeks or months ago. I can't tell you. So we'll have to just walk around that corner blindly and see what's happening. But at least we have some idea based on previous cycles. Well, something you said in some of your videos is America is over. America is over as we know it. And that's very intriguing. It's a very intriguing statement. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at a lot of the cultural institutions that have been identified with this country. All right, let's look at something like the Final Four, right? The Final Four, March Madness, gone, ended, right? There are events that we associate with this kind of, I don't know, sort of sort of pagan calendar of America, right? Final Four, March. Every time, as March creeps up, everybody's thinking, hey, we got to go to Vegas. Who's coming this year? Which hotel are we going to stay at? Right? You got your brackets, whole nine yards. Okay. That didn't happen. That was like, that's over. What about the NBA? Yeah, well, guess what? The NBA, the championship, and all that stuff, that's over. That didn't happen. They've got some weird thing they're doing in Florida. I don't know what it is, but I can tell you right now, it has nothing to do with a culture that was pre-existing. Major League Baseball, spring training, the rite of spring, right? Like, what, you live in Arizona, you know what that's all about. I took my kid there one time to Arizona. We did spring training. It's a thing. It is a thing that's associated with this country. And guess what? No spring training. And guess what? No minor league baseball. We're going to get some kind of weird baseball season with cutouts of people in the stands. So the cultural trinkets, or the cultural kind of add-ons to these things that define what America is, well, they're not there. And they're probably not coming back. They're just not coming back. And if they do come back, maybe it'll be under like some sort of, America vaccine passport world, but that'll be a different America. It won't be the one that we're in now, or the one that existed. Okay, what about high school graduations? Guess what? They didn't happen. College graduations, they didn't happen. So all these things, Easter, that didn't happen. Yeah, Mother's Day and Father's Day kind of happened, but all these things that we associate with America and our culture, they didn't happen. They're done, right? And when people talk about resurrecting them and bringing them back, it's always like, well, what about Corona this, Corona that? All right, so that's just like one layer. Now, if we go back and we look at, 311 is the day. Like 311 is what's interesting about 311 is that's also the day that Fukushima happened in 2011. So we have these two interesting kinds of like events that happen on 311. And 311 is when the NBA canceled its season, and after that, it's just the whole domino effect. Just there it is, and then everything begins to shut down. Okay, so now we have to have a response to the so-called coronavirus. Well, what was the response? It wasn't a federal response. It was Trump saying, we're going to let the states handle this. Well, at a certain level, that sounds great, right? Because every state has a different kind of thing going on. Apparently, there was a lot happening in New York, whatever that thing was, and not a lot happening in South Dakota. So why should South Dakota theoretically respond in the same way as New York? I get it, right? But once that happened, the states began to act independently, and there was no unified response to any of this. None whatsoever. You had one state doing one thing, another state doing another thing, another state doing another. It's kind of getting a little closer to some level of unification. Like, you're not California, in terms of this response. We're not California, but it's inching a little closer. But the states were not unified. They weren't unified at all. So it's like, oh, gee, isn't that interesting? We're not acting as one country. We are not the United States of America. We are not united. We were not united in our response. We were not united in our attitudes and beliefs around how we theoretically could approach this. You have people wearing masks, demanding other people wear masks, other people not wearing masks. We now have the statuary that was the iconography of the country removed. And there are still some statues that are around, but these are symbols of the country, and they were removed, right? They were connected to a particular story. And people may say, oh, well, that's just cosmetic and everything. But these statues, they're like, in some ways, they're like pre-animated golems in some ways, right? And so, This is what they represent, a certain thing. They represent a period of time and a person and a spirit that at one point was animated. So those have been removed. Oh, well, okay. All right. Isn't that interesting? Now we don't have those things. So we don't have our seasonal rituals. We don't have the statuary. The states are not uniform in terms of their response. Now we have Oklahoma being split up into an Indian reservation and a state. Okay, so just look around and do the math. We are no longer the United States of America. We are not united. We are not united as one people. We have an emerging revolution that's taking place, right? And in a lot of ways, we're kind of fighting for our lives on a certain front that we don't really even understand and know about. So, this is why I believe that the United States, as we know it, is over. It's done. It is done. And, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? You look at the history of this country, and man, this country's done a lot of shit and a lot of bad shit. Okay. A lot of bad shit. And, could we as individuals have done anything to stop that bad shit? Could we have somehow prevented, a bloody march through Iraq and Afghanistan? Could we have somehow prevented the atrocities of Guantanamo Bay and Gitmo? I don't know. I mean, I wrote my congressman. I wrote multiple Congress people. I was not down with the program, right? But I was just a singular voice. And you go back and you look at that time. It's really interesting to go back and look at that time. Where was the left during that time? Like, the left has got, fire ants in its pants now. But during that time, they were just silent. You had basically a Cindy Sheehan and what's her name? Benjamin. And that was it. Those were the people that were standing up and saying, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing and sending troops onto this foreign soil is wrong. And that was it. Other than that, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, they were all around, and they're all just rubber stamping that reality, right? They were rubber stamping that reality and that hell. And we created that hell. So that part of the history of the country, or, I think it's good that theoretically is over, but is it really that part over? There are other parts of it that I think that aren't good. There are parts that are very soulful. And I was not born on this soil. I was born in France, but I've always considered myself an American. And whenever there's an emergency in the world, the Americans are there. They're there. They're throwing money at Red Cross. I mean, this is a country born under a Cancerian sun. For all intents and purposes, we care. We care. There's a great soul to this country. And if somehow this version of what it was is removed so we can recapture the soul, in a new way, then, so be it. And by the way, sports became just this kind of tumescent and metastasized, spectator, object, right? The society, the spectacle of the society, society of the spectacle, right? And very disempowering. So I'm not shedding any tears that these things aren't around any longer. It's really kind of time for us to sort of move beyond them anyway. So, but it's over, it's done with. And the quicker that people understand this, the better we can get to whatever this new thing is, the faster we can get to it. And trust me, it'll be a lot better than ultimately, what we allowed other people to create for us.
Absolutely. Well, being a Cancerian country, I've always felt that America is kind of the world fridge. We go around the world, some disaster happens. We're like,
I love that, the world fridge.
We're the world fridge. You guys look hungry. Let's feed these people. Look at that. and that's something, beautiful about the country. But, are we really doing that now, or are we bombing the shit out of countries? And because there's been a change, I think, ever since, you could say, the first Gulf War. Maybe that was a change in the way that we went from the good Cancerian country, kind of like this, grandma that's always trying to feed everybody, to kind of maybe George W. Bush's version of that, where it's like, they're fat enough. Let's send cruise missiles, you know. And you mentioned sports changing. Well, yeah, I think that this is the time of the individual because sports, really, I think the sports that matter now is the sports that you play within your community, is your neighbors, you know, and literally going to the park in your community and playing football or playing baseball. So I do think that the big sports, they no longer matter. They've been corrupt and kind of disgusting for quite a while. The sports that matter and I think will matter in the future are really, you know, the dad, you know, throwing a football with his son in the backyard. I think that's what matters way more than the big picture. It's not that I'm blindly patriotic. I mean, I understand there's, you know, endless points of view to things, but the Kirkpatrick guy always really sort of, something seemed like something in the universe changed when that guy got famous for kneeling at the national anthem and then saying, you know, risk your bullshit even if you pretend to lose something, whatever it was.
Kaepernick.
Yeah, Kaepernick. And then like Nike taking him on as a spokesperson and all this. I'm like, I get where he's coming from. I'm not really so much trying to get into the argument whether he's valid or not. But to me, it's the same. It really is changing America's, I should say, like, what is America? As far as you say, like, America's over. Things have changed. When he kneeled, I think America changed. When that was tolerated, when he wasn't instantly just fired, then I think that's when things changed. And even as odd as it might sound, Sports Illustrated is a, you know, for people who are listening who are, you know, who are not American, I don't know how to describe it, but Sports Illustrated magazine is just this, I don't know, it's part of our country, and it's about sports. It's a magazine that comes out monthly. I mean, subscriptions have been falling over time because now we have the internet. We don't do magazines so much, but once a year you have your swimsuit edition. And it's kind of like a snap-on calendar. It's always been girly. It's just sexy. It's beautiful. Guys spend some time with it down in their man cave. You know, it's just one of those things. It's part of America. You know, it's like the Sears catalog used to be. It came and it was like, oh my God, everybody be looking at it. You know, things have changed, and now there is a transgender person on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I'm not so much making it right or wrong, but it definitely is a change. That's not America anymore as it was. So I think the changes are everywhere.
Yeah, they're absolutely. I mean, that's a really great. It's a really great kind of not analogy. It's just a great observation. And I remember, you know, the first time, you know, Cheryl Tiegs was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, right? Every kind of red-blooded American male sort of remembers that moment because she was, you know, sort of this buxom woman and filled out a bathing suit quite nicely, right? And Sports Illustrated was also a really interesting place for writers and people like Frank DeFord and Pete Axthelm and a lot of really, really good writers were inside of Sports Illustrated. There's definitely kind of an art to writing about sports. It's quite interesting in some ways. But if you want to talk about Kaepernick, man, I have a lot to say about Kaepernick. If you want to,
definitely, yeah, go into that because you know we've been going for a while. I'm happy going for 2 hours if we got the time, and you know I'd love to. Yeah, what are your thoughts on him? Because he's definitely this is it's a pivotal figure in America at this time. For sure.
So I you know, I'm from the Bay Area and I'm a big San Francisco 49er fan. I wasn't always a 49er fan. I was a Raider fan and then they left. And then Bill Walsh came in and took over and Walsh is a genius. So I was a, you know, 49er and they were, you know, there was a period there where they were really bad, really, really bad. And this guy, Jim Harbaugh, comes in and he becomes the coach of the 49ers. And what he did is he handpicked Colin Kaepernick. That was his guy. They picked him in the second round of the draft. And it was, I believe, the 2012 season. And, you know, and I was a total draftnik and I would scout players out. And so I was looking at Kaepernick's highlight reel when he was in college at the University of Nevada. And his stats were just eye-popping. Like nobody in college football was doing the things that he was doing. He was rushing for 150, 200 yards a game, throwing for 400 yards. I mean, it was just gaudy. It was like, he was playing at a whole other level. He was playing in a system called the pistol, which is quite interesting. If you think about pistols and cops and everything, that made him such a good player. So I knew who he was coming into the draft. They drafted us. Oh, this is going to be interesting. So I was at that time. I was doing astrology on my website, and I was doing a lot of sports astrology, and I was following the 49ers, and the 49ers quarterback at that time was a guy by the name of Alex Smith. And Alex Smith is a Taurus, and he's got Saturn in Scorpio. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Alex Smith's chart. And I'm like, he's going to go through his Saturn return. And I'm like, well, let me check out Kaepernick. I'm like, oh, Kaepernick is a Scorpio. So Kaepernick is going to be part of Alex Smith's Saturn return story. And I'm like, I can see what's going to happen. He's going to take Alex Smith's job. And I swear to God, I used to be part of this forum on the Utney Cafe. It became the new cafe. It was a 49er forum. And I was looking at the charts, and there was this game coming up against the Rams. And I said, Alex Smith is going to get hurt this Sunday. And Colin Kaepernick is going to get the starting job, and Alex Smith will never start again for the San Francisco 49ers. And that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. Alex Smith got hurt. Colin Kaepernick became the starter. Okay, I'm like, okay, now let me follow Kaepernick. And I began to look at his chart, and I began to essentially call things out before it actually happened. It was really like I was really dialed into Kaepernick in a very interesting sort of way. And it even went up to the Super Bowl, and I'm looking at the Super Bowl, and I'm trying to figure out who was going to win the Super Bowl. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of really weird aspects at this Super Bowl. And I said, there's going to be darkness. There's going to be darkness that's going to come over this Super Bowl. Like there's going to be a really dark period in this Super Bowl. And it literally happened. The lights went out in New Orleans at this Super Bowl. And it was really freaky. I mean, I was that dialed into this guy. And I didn't know if he was going to be able to carry the day or not. And at the end of the day, he did. But what's interesting about his chart is that he almost has an exact conjunction between his sun in Scorpio and Pluto in Scorpio. So if you know a little bit about astrology, that's like really freaking powerful. Like this is a guy that would have some kind of deep and transformational impact, not only on his life, but the life of other people as well. And a lot of people don't know this about Kaepernick, but he was a big Christian. He was really a big follower of Christ and Bible verses up and down his arms. And he made this very Plutonian sort of transformation and became, the person that we see today, which is in a lot of ways not very Christian. He became basically a social Marxist revolutionary. And it happened because he got injured and he had to rehab, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, his knee and his shoulder. And during that period, he became lovers with this gal named Nessa. And Nessa is short for Vanessa. Her last name is Diab, and she's Egyptian. And she's on a show called Hot 97. And she was like MTV's It Girl. Anyway, Kaepernick steals her from another guy on the team named Alden Smith. And Alden Smith had kind of a drinking problem. Good player, drinking problem. He finds out that Kaepernick's taking his girl, and he smashes Kaepernick's car up. Right? He smashes the car, and then he gets kicked off the team. But Kaepernick gets radicalized during this period. And Nessa is also a vegan. And so if you look at Kaepernick, he's a beanpole. So everything that he had to put on his body, which was pure muscle, was all protein. So then he gets into a vegan diet, and it changes his body. I'm not sure if he converted to being a Muslim or not, but she is a Muslim. And he becomes radicalized. And the reason why he started kneeling was because he was moping that he had lost his job to Blaine Gabbert. And he was just sitting around moping kind of, by the water cooler during the national anthem. He was just moping. And the people were saying, oh, look at him. What's he doing? Oh, is he protesting? He wasn't really protesting. He was just kind of moping. And then this guy who was a football player and I think a ranger, Nate, I forget his last name now, it'll come to me, said to him, hey, man, you really should kneel, right? So the whole kneeling thing has its genesis in this guy who was a special ranger, an army ranger. So that's when he started kneeling. And it had really nothing to do with, it sort of evolved over him being pissed off that he wasn't starting. And now he's starting to kneel, and all of a sudden it took on this kind of epic proportion. And there's the other thing with Kaepernick, which is really kind of interesting, is that he was adopted. His mother was she was from Wisconsin, and she put him up for adoption. And I know, and this is a very public story. I'm not saying anything that isn't out there. Her last name is Russo, and she's Italian, and which means Russo is red, right? That's the color red, right? And so she put him up for adoption, and this family from California adopted him, and they went to Wisconsin because apparently they make cheese. It's like a family that has a dairy farm and makes cheese. So he grew up in a family that took really good care of him. Right, really good care of him. And one could even say that he was the recipient of white privilege because of his family. And his mother wanted to somehow, kind of reconnect with him and be a part of his life again. And he always rejected her, right? This is a public story. I'm not saying anything that's not in the press. So he rejected her and rejected his mother. And he's had that sort of maternal rejection going on for a very, very long time. And I think some of these things that we hold personally, if you're a collective individual, right, which he is, that your personal complex gets worked out on the world in some ways. And so I think he's got a severe mother issue and a severe rejection issue, massive. And no matter what his adopted parents did, which was everything right. Like he grew up in a beautiful family. Like he's even on some level rejecting that now, right? I would really like to sit down with Colin Kaepernick's adopted family and to see what they really think and feel about him at this point in time. And there's a whole other kind of weird sort of like meta subtext with this. And that if you look at Jim Harbaugh, very interesting character. Jim Harbaugh is a gladiator, right? He would talk about things like, he would call his players mighty men. And mighty men is a biblical reference, by the way. And Harbaugh, he would always have this, like he and his brother would go to these Civil War reenactments and stuff like that. So he was really like the way of the warrior. That was Jim Harbaugh. And in fact, he even got into a fight with another coach, the coach of the Detroit Lions. He was very confrontational. And so Harbaugh had this kind of like warrior, centurion kind of vibe about him. And Kaepernick really feels like he was handpicked by Harbaugh to play the role of the centurion or the warrior, right? It's like the movie with what's his name, Russell Crowe. It's like that whole vibe.
Gladiator.
Was it Gladiator? Right. It's like the thing between Harbaugh and Kaepernick is like so archetypally gladiatorial. And Harbaugh is the Oliver Reed character, and Kaepernick is the Russell Crowe character. And what's really interesting is that the offensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers was a guy by the name of Greg Roman. Okay. So now we have Roman in the mix. He's the guy that is drawing up the offense for Colin Kaepernick. And if you look at the 2012 season, and to some extent the 2013 season, Colin Kaepernick was about as close as you could get to a one-man wrecking crew in the NFL. Like, he played against the Green Bay Packers in a playoff game, and he literally destroyed that team. He destroyed that team. He was about as close as you could get to a modern gladiator. And go back and you look at the last name of his mother, it's Russo, and she's Italian, right? And so here we go, the roots of Rome again. And then once Harbaugh leaves, that's when Colin Kaepernick's world falls apart. It totally falls apart. And it's like his handler or his mentor is gone. The guy that created the entire system for him to be successful is gone. And who's there? Nobody. There's nobody there. There's Chip Kelly, and Chip Kelly's he's a nobody. He has no kind of psychological import in his life. So now you've got, for all intents and purposes, like Kaepernick was like handled, right? He's like handled, and his handler's gone. His Oliver Reed sort of gladiator mentor is gone. And who's there to pick up the pieces? This kind of radicalized, intersectionalist from New York City, which is where Colin Kaepernick lives now. And so now you've got the story after that, right? You have sort of this fall of Colin Kaepernick, and he goes from sort of this very kind of Apollonian figure to be this very kind of Dionysian figure in some ways, ruled by emotion, ruled by compulsion, not being ruled by the logic and the light of reason. It's a very interesting story. And to your point, I think he's important in that regard. And because he has this Sun-Pluto conjunction in his chart, he is this kind of cultural character that is very transformational. But to what end, right? To what end? He's already gone through one transformation. Will there be another? And I believe there will be for him, because he has his moon in Aries. And if we have Chiron in Aries, he's going to have a conjunction with Chiron and his moon, which means that there will probably be the illness or the death of one of his mothers. It could either be his birth mother or it could be his adopted mother. And I guarantee you that will mark a change in his life, a very significant change. And I would not be surprised if we see kind of another chapter and another iteration of Colin Kaepernick.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And that's much more than I think most people know about him, for sure. Well, it's one of the challenging moons, I think, is Aries that he's got. I've always thought two moons that can be challenging are Scorpio and Aries. And along
yes, I agree. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
And along with rising. So I think any chart that has a strong Aries or a strong Scorpio, to me, is always a bit of a challenging chart. And with Aries moon, it isn't like he's going to spend too much time to make rational decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got a Jupiter conjunction with his moon too. So he's got true node, the moon, and Jupiter all in the sign of Aries, right? So that true node in Aries is at 1 degree. So that is conjunct the beginning of the astrological new year, right? That's a really powerful aspect to have as the true node. So and then the moon is amplified by the conjunction with Jupiter. And then on the other side of that, we've got Mars in Libra, which to me, and I've taken a lot of heat for this, but if there's any aspect that is the neon sign for social justice warriors, it's Mars in Libra. And he's got this Mars opposition with the moon, which is, very intense conflict in a lot of ways with the moon as well. And his sun sign is at 10 Scorpio, and his Pluto's at 9. So that as an astrologer, when you or having some idea about astrology, that, those really, really tight degrees or those tight orbs are very intense, very intense. And when you get into Scorpio, you get into compulsion, right? Compulsion and obsession and riding the waves of really collective energies. So he's got a very intense chart. What he does not have a lot of in his chart is Earth. He's got Neptune and Capricorn, and that's it. So, being kind of grounded and rooted and solid is just not a part of his astrological codec. But I do think that when Chiron conjuncts his moon, he's going to have some issues. He'll have some issues there, and especially as it is in opposition with his natal Mars, and that's going to be an interesting time for him. Very interesting, and I think he'll probably wind up going in backtracking. Right? He was born under Mercury retrograde too. So I think that there's potential for him to, reverse course at some point in time. Not that I'm saying he should do that, but I think it's potentially. What's interesting, I've never seen this. I never made this connection before, but his Venus is conjunct my ascendant. And maybe that's why I was connected into him and was able to sort of go X-ray into his chart. So there you go.
No, it's great. And what I like about talking about something specific like that, especially with someone that everyone knows, like Colin, is that it helps people get a better grasp of astrology. It helps them see, like, look at the stars that he has, and his chart is challenging, and then especially if you know of someone in your life that has a strong Aries leaning in their chart. It helps you understand them, especially. Yeah, because I've always felt that people with strong Scorpio and or strong Aries, they're always their life is never easy. So I was thinking about astrology. When you look at a person's chart, some are all fairy tales and rainbows. You go, oh wow, this person's got a great chart. Then sometimes you look at a chart and you go, oh man, how am I gonna make this sound a little better?
Well, I mean, that's really the beauty of astrology, and that's why I think I had a bit of a kind of a discourse on this today, like picking the right person to be able to get into your chart. I think is really important because some people can have a really deleterious effect on how they interpret certain things. And other people can look at something and say, well, this is pretty challenging. You've got this going on, that going on. And, but there are some redeeming factors here and you can focus on this area. And there's always those sorts of things that can happen. Like I've seen very few charts that are completely irredeemable. That doesn't mean that they're easy. There can be very difficult charts, and understanding the difficult charts is kind of an important thing in and of itself, right? Like a person needs to understand that on some level. Like you can't sugarcoat it for them. But giving them constructive ways to deal with their chart is, I think, important. It's important. And look, we can't solve everything, and some things are just out of our hands, and it is the way it is, right? And, you have to go through things, and that's just how life operates.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the real values, I think, of astrology is that there's so many people that I've met later in life who've definitely been beating their head against life for quite a while, and it's been difficult. And I just think, man, if somebody, when they were young, I'm not sure what age would be the appropriate to start, but basically, if only everyone had an astrologer, because then you would know. Like, so a person who has a very challenging chart or a good chart, the guidance that can offer throughout life. Like for me, I don't know, when do you think you would introduce someone to their chart?
I think it really depends on the individual. I had a session today with a 16-year-old, and she was ready for it. She was ready to hear some of the things I had to say. She has Chiron in Capricorn in her 12th house, and I looked at the degree of Chiron, and we can generally kind of assess what's going on with what's termed a chirotic crisis in the individual's life, roughly by the degree of Chiron in the chart. And I've seen this, I've lived it. So I asked her, I said, well, what happened to you between the age of 11 and 13? And she told me flat out, well, this is when there was a terrible divorce in our family, and my stepmother did this and this and this, and and she didn't get overly emotional about it, but I could tell that it had made a very significant impact on her. But in a lot of ways, that was preparation and training, because at 25 Capricorn ascending, right, she's got Pluto sitting on her ascendant. She's had Saturn go through her like 12th house. This is somebody who was ready for this, right? She was ready to hear the astrological breakdown. So, yeah, great. 16 years old, boom, good to go. You could talk to some 16-year-old and they may not be ready for it. But I feel like if an adolescent is open to the information and it's the right person sharing the information, I think an astrological reading in the teens can be invaluable, and it could save people a lot of heartache and a lot of missteps along the way. They still have to live their lives, don't get me wrong, but if you can kind of guide them and focus them in a particular direction, it can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like, yeah, a person with a lot of strong areas in their chart. You help them transmute maybe that fire energy, that abundance of fire, that molten lava into creativity, into the strengths that they can actually put that forth towards. Yeah, every chart, if a person just knows how to lean on the positive side of their stars, boom, huge difference in life. Well, along with America being over, which in truth it's true, it's between cycles, I guess is what
Yes,
we would say.
agreed. Yeah.
America is between cycles, and they're powerful cycles, and that's something for all of us to take on, because I know that for me, well, for us here at Radiant Creators Central, and for many people, they really are experiencing that sense of they're going through experiences of loss, of mourning, and they're not necessarily negative at this point, but like you go to the mall, right? And a person may like malls, may not like malls, but you go through a mall now, half the stores are closed, malls are over. Sadly, too many small businesses are over. We're going into this time of where there'll still be smaller businesses, but like certain businesses that have taken huge hits are gyms and martial arts studios, huge hits.
Yep. And by the way, I believe that's intentional. That is totally
yes. Yeah, it's definitely intentional. And so we're going through this mourning, and I think it helps what you're saying. I mean, it helps to deep dive into this, is because, America's going through a transition. And it's fair enough to say that America is over. It's changing chapters. And we don't really know what the next chapter is going to look like. And there very well could be, and it's multidimensional. There's two chapters, love train, fear train, But the love train definitely belongs to the individual. So I know many people will sometimes spend time pondering, what can I do about the injustice that I see in the world, the things that I see in this country that are not good? I've always thought, work on your body, mind, and spirit. Become as powerful as you can be, because then you will be able to fulfill truly the positive side of your stars, your destiny, and you'll just be where you need to be. The synchronicity will be in perfection, and you will be part of the multidimensional split that is, well, to me, favorable.
Yes, those are really, really good guidelines. And I just think about kind of, where we are, and where I am now, and where I was 2 years ago, and then 2 years before that. And it's a really, where we were as a country and as a planet. I mean, it's a really mind-boggling kind of sort of look backwards in a lot of ways, and how fast things have happened and how quickly things have accelerated, which is good. I mean, the acceleration means, if you're into growth, you can cover a lot of ground really quickly, right? I mean, if you are into that kind of model, there's plenty of that to go around. So yeah, this is a really good time for that. And the morning piece is a difficult one. It's a difficult one for a lot of people to handle, and one that I run into occasionally for myself, more often with others. And, I'm a Scorpio rising, so I'm kind of used to sort of endings and deaths and things like that. And and I say this lovingly, that I think that the quicker that people can wrap their heads around that this is not going back and it's not going to be the same, and you put it away, you put it in a basket, like the better off you're going to be. Like consciously dealing with the death of whatever this thing is really important. It's really important because you won't have any. Here, let me frame this in a certain way, okay?
Yes.
We're dealing with a class of people that have absolutely no morality at all, okay? There is a group of people on this planet. You can say that they're there for us to grow, that they're high level members of a certain game or whatever, right? But they don't have the same kind of moral connections that a lot of people do. And in fact, they even have rituals to eliminate any vestiges of moral concern. It's called the cremation of care, right? So you're dealing with a group of people that have no morality. No morality. So they can do things and they can change the script and they won't think twice about it. Okay? They won't. Now, in order to be able to deal with this consciousness and to understand the rules that they play by, you don't have to become them, but you also have to have an equal position. And that position has a lot to do with looking at the world that we've been in and not having a sentimental relationship with it. Like, I was a baseball coach with my kid and I loved it. And guess what? That's not coming back. And I could look back at those times and I could tear up and everything, but it's not coming back, right? So the faster we can get into the now and not have those sentimental like hooks in us, guess what? We're now on more of an even playing field with these people or these entities or these egregores that have eliminated their conscience. And as a result of that, can do just about anything. But for us, theoretically, our conscience remains intact. Our morality remains intact. What we've removed is the hooks into the past. We're like sentimentality is really not a great quality in some ways. It's really not. And in fact, it's been played upon over and over and over again in advertising, whatever, right? They always play on our sentimentality. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a robot, but you have to redefine love in a very different kind of way, and your memories in a different kind of way at the same time. So in order to get present and now and deal with these people who have a very conscienceless kind of agenda, it's like you got to let go of the past. It doesn't mean you have to become a psychopath or a sociopath. We got to get on a level playing field with this consciousness, because they use it against us. Oh, remember how it was 3 months ago? Yeah, well, August 15th, we'll open things back up again. They're playing on our relationship with our immediate past. And then you get to August 15th. Well, I don't know. It's going to be Labor Day now, right? They're constantly doing this. They have no conscience. And they're playing on like our sentimentality of 90 days ago. That's how bad it is. So once you get rid of that, they can't fuck with you anymore. Pardon my language. It's like, let's go. All right, let's go. Let's roll up our sleeves. We're not going to play that game anymore. And when you don't play that game anymore, they go, gee, interesting. I noticed that you had Wim Hof on your show.
We've talked about Wim Hof. We've linked to him. Yeah.
Okay. He's an interesting character. I read this weird little sort of back and forth on a message board. And this guy was supposedly an Illuminati insider. And he said that they have decided to leave Wim Hof alone. Like he's untouchable because he's figured out how to quote unquote ascend. Okay. Now I'm not saying to go out and practice your Wim Hof breathing or, master cold or whatever, but there's something there. Like there's a there. Like they realize that they don't have any power or hold over this guy. If that's true, if what I read was true. And what most people um, don't understand is the hooks that they have in us and the power that they hold over us, whether it's for fear of losing our job, our income, our family, our loved ones. And some of those things are quite real, by the way. And some of those things are, they're very important. Like, you don't really want to poke the bear at times, right? You just don't want to do that. But you have to also remove anything theoretically that can that can be manipulated. And so by saying goodbye to the 20th century and goodbye to the things that we cherished and loved in the malls and all that stuff, the sooner you get there, the better it is. And that doesn't mean you have to accept their program. It doesn't.
And what do you really miss? It's something I've been thinking about too when it comes to the mourning. People are really missing things in the past, experiences in the past where they experienced the sweetness of life. Ultimately, that's what it really is. They went, wow, I experienced the sweetness of life going to the mall. I experienced the sweetness of life going to the dog park. Well, that's what you're really, I think when we break it down, that's what's being mourned in the past that is no longer there. And I think, well, you have the sweetness of life right now. The sweetness of life is the experience of life. So bring that back to this moment right now. Master that. Have it now, and you'll have it in the future also. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think that's a great way to, as I put it, take it away from the globalists. Don't let your sweetness of life be history, be what they can take from you, because you have it right now. And I think that's one of the, an incredible superpower that we have. Wim Hof very well may have to, just beat them. Go, as you're saying, get over the past, be done with it. Realize that you don't really miss the past or what you did. You miss the sweetness of life you experienced at certain moments. Bring it back here. You've got it. You still have it right now. It can't be taken from you. You don't need the past to have it.
That's a really wonderful way of putting it. And, I'm a Scorpio rising, so, I can be a little intense and a little dark. And but most of my first house is Sag, and I have Jupiter in Sag. And at some point, I don't know, I think it was about a year ago, and I was actually taking a lot of cues from Trump around this, believe it or not. And not that I'm a huge Trump fan or supporter. I think he's interesting on a lot of different levels. But one of the things Trump is trained in is being positive. He was mentored by Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote the book The Power of Positive Thinking, 33rd Degree Mason. So Trump understands this. You hear him, awesome, great. He's always kind of on that positive tip. So I decided that I was going to bring more positivity into my life. Like, that was going to be my practice. And it was really interesting because initially I had some resistance, like, oh, you Pollyanna motherfucker. It's like, you're just bullshitting yourself and you're bullshitting other people, keep it real. And I kind of got over that. And because I have a podcast I do every day, like, I got to make sure that, I have some coherence when I do my thing, and I don't want to be negative. I want to be, I made a choice to be truthful, but not negative, which was a real kind of shift for me. And then when this whole coronavirus thing hit, it was like people would ask me how I was doing, and I'd say, I'm great. I'm great. How are you doing? I'm great. Really? Oh, yeah. It's fantastic. Right? Because, and this is to your point about the sweetness, right? I'm not going to let them take that away from me. I'm not going to allow them to define how I'm feeling in this moment. Oh, I'm pissed off because I can't go to the gym. Fuck it. I'll figure it out. Right? I'll figure it out. And I'm still going to be great. And it may take a little bit of work, but again, what are your options? You can either opt into what you were talking about, or you can opt into something else. And that's really not going to be all that helpful. So the sweet, that's, to me, that's a big missing piece, because I've been talking with certain people And one guy, very gifted guy, gifted healer, and he would bring this up. He would bring up things like, you know, getting on the rope at the lake and jumping off the rope at the lake, and the people were there and all. He was bringing a lot of this stuff up, and I'm like, okay, that's great, you know, that's over now. And what he was really pining for, you know, and really lamenting was that sweetness piece that you were able to articulate. And I think it's, you know, I think it's important. So yeah, keep that sweetness alive.
Absolutely, keep that alive. And you've already won. Like every day, I think that you experience life. You have the experience of life and that sweetness. You cheated You cheated the dark forces. You won that day. So if I experience the sweetness of life, the experience of life today, and I get taken out tomorrow, I won. Every day that you experience, you win. Because tomorrow, the next moment's never guaranteed. So, really, every day, even if it's a brief moment, hopefully it's a whole damn day, but even if it's a brief moment, the experience of the sweetness of life, you won. If the globalists come take you tomorrow, that's fine. You won, and you'll always have it because it exists here in truth in this moment. Well, I've had you forever. Don't want to keep you, all day. But one thing I like to touch on the way out is red states versus blue states. And do they really even exist? Because as we mentioned, America is over. America's going through a new cycle. People oftentimes have historically gone to states that are blue or red. That's how they think of it. And they go, I like it here, it's blue. I like it here, it's red. But to me, something I'm seeing, and this is part of the changing, this is part of the new cycle, is there's nowhere really to go that's going to represent the way you think if you're a sovereign being anyway, really. Because is Texas really a red state? It's got Austin. Washington State, where the Chaz happened, it's got Seattle. You have Arizona, it's got Phoenix. Really, the population densities in the cities, they're in general blue, and then you have the rest of the states kind of red. I think this whole red-blue duality is sort of, for better or worse, kind of done.
Yeah, I mean, it's now it's like, mask, non-mask. It's gone beyond even red and blue in some ways. So, I live in Texas. I'm not from Texas. I lived in California most of my life. So I know what it's like to live in California, and I know what it's like to live in Texas. And I can tell you right now, I'm more of a Texan than a lot of Texans. And I'm not even from here.
I get it. Yes.
And when I was in California, I lived in sort of the Marin County bubble. I lived on the other side of the San Rafael Bridge, but I had a lot of friends in Marin County, and I used to go to events with David Wilcock would show up, or David Avocado Wolf would be there. I mean, that kind of world and circle. And some of those people were good people, and some of those people were just so patently out of touch. They were like, they had no idea that there was another world that existed past Martinez. And if it did exist past Martinez, they had no comprehension of what that world was like. And I remember being involved with this woman. It was a very nice woman. And at that time, she was kind of a vegan, a pescatarian, whatever. And she would come over to my apartment, and she would look at all of the sauces that I had in my refrigerator, and I was like, creating a major culture sin by having all these different sauces in my refrigerator. And I remember kind of being called out on that, and I was driving a Yukon, SUV, and I remember being called out on that a little bit. I'm like, I think you and I are about to part ways. And
Yeah.
And we did. And here's what's really interesting about her is that she showed up on Twitter like, I don't know, about 2 months ago to me. And she's had this really interesting ability to be very relevant with social media, even though she's like not a social media kid. She's our age. And she became this very popular Twitter person called the Reformed Vegan. And she posts all about meat and how meat changed her life, right? So it's quite interesting to see that with her. But But again, she represented kind of a group of people at that time that had no understanding of flyover and no understanding of a certain type of America. And, and I have a lot of compassion for that version of America in a lot of ways. Like they don't understand that some of these people work 2, 3 jobs back when people were working in order to make ends meet. Do they have bad food? Sure they do. Do they go to the doctor and take, bad drugs? Sure they do. They don't really know any better, right? But they're doing their best to keep their lives together and their families together. And they didn't really understand or comprehend that. And so I would always get kind of like, I'm going to say upset, but it kind of pissed me off that they would be, in this place of, spiritual kind of exaltation. I didn't like it. I didn't dig it. I come from a blue collar family. Anyway, and now being, in this world, it's very interesting because, I'm living much closer to that kind of demographic. And some of these people absolutely line up that way. And a lot of them are really, really good people. They're really good. And, and I've also met assholes here too, right? And they're not exclusive to one state. But it's interesting to see the thing that kind of, how do I say this, transcends this kind of red and blue definition. And the thing that transcends it is called obedience. And I'm seeing theoretically strong-willed, independent-minded Texans. Don't mess with Texas. And I don't live in Austin. Austin's a whole different universe. I live in a very conservative part of Texas. And it was founded by Germans. And it's a big ag area, and there's a lot of hunters. And like I said at the beginning, I went to HEB, and it was 99.9% mass saturation. And you would think that a Texan would say, I'm not wearing that damn mask, right? And there are some that don't. Don't get me wrong. I've seen them around town. But it's amazing just how obedient these people became. So this is the thing now with smudging the lines of the red and the blue thing, which I think is quite interesting. And you're right. There is really no place there are better places. Don't get me wrong. There are certainly better places. I'd rather take my chances in a small town somewhere. I don't care what the state is. Make it a small town, make it semi-rural. I'd rather take my chances in that place than in an urban center. Period. End of story.
Absolutely. Well,
and
those lines that are being blurred, like, so it was red versus blue or blue versus red. Now, with what you're saying, it feels more like it's soulful, those who own their own soul, versus golems.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. Soulful, absolutely. Yeah, soulful versus the soulless.
And I don't make it a point to go out and flaunt the fact that I'm not wearing a mask. I don't like, let's see what business I can go to today, not wear a mask, right? No, I spend most of my time in my house working with people, but when I do go out, I'm not gonna wear the face diaper. I'm just not. And if somebody says you can't come in here without wearing a mask, I'm not going to go in there. I may challenge them if I need to, but I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to move on and say, fine, you're not going to get my business. And the sheriff in this town, he won't arrest anybody for not wearing a mask. I know that. I talked to him. So there you go. It's kind of a weak law in that regard. But yeah, I think we've got to stand up and look, and I have no judgment on you, putting the mask on and get what you need to get done. Like you've got a mindset, right? You're going to be the guy that's going to blend in, right? That's your role. That's your mindset. And that's fine. You're conscious and aware of that. Most of these people aren't even conscious and aware. I'm just going to put the mask on, right? You know what you've got to do. You're in stealth mode. So that's fine. I do what I do because that's who I am, for better or worse. And this is the way I'm wired.
Yeah, focusing on that I of the individual, versus the golem in our society today. Well, Robert Phoenix, it's been amazing having you on today. It's been 2 hours and 12 minutes and 33 seconds that we've been talking. And
wow.
It's people who want to know more about Robert Phoenix. Well, you can go to robertphoenix.com. You can also find him on YouTube. And on YouTube, Robert is amazing. He is a content creating machine. Is there any other ways people might find your work or get a hold of you as we sign off?
I think that's my YouTube channels, my website. I got to do website launching pretty soon, and that's pretty much about it. It's been a real pleasure, Craig. You've been awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll make sure that people are aware of your work and what you're doing. And we really have to form those interstitial bonds with one another so that we can support one another. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it too. Thank you so much for being on. And yeah, tribe is the way to go. That's what we need to focus on right now, is our tribe. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on, Robert Phoenix.
You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A radiant creator isn't making a living, they are living.